Welcome to True Echo, where stories of injustice, betrayal, and redemption find their voice. Every echo carries a truth, and here, we uncover the moments that test the human spirit, and the courage it takes to rise above. Today's story is one you won't forget. The storm outside rattled against the glass windows of the Hawthorne estate, sheets of rain smearing the manicured view of the gardens beyond. Inside, the silence was heavy, the kind of silence that wasn't peace but the aftermath of tension stretched to breaking. Edward Hawthorne, the stern-faced billionaire whose name commanded headlines and respect in corporate boardrooms, had just returned home from a late-night meeting, his coat dripping with rain, his jaw clenched with the weight of too many sleepless nights. But tonight, his fury had not been aimed at business rivals or failing markets. No, it had landed squarely on the woman in his bed. "What the hell do you think you're doing here?" His voice had boomed through the master bedroom like a thunderclap, his tall frame filling the doorway, rainwater streaking down his coat. His eyes narrowed on Maya Williams, the woman he had hired as a maid just weeks ago, the woman he now found lying in the very bed he once shared with his late wife. Maya had not flinched at his words. She had sat upright slowly, her heart hammering in her chest, but her eyes steady, wide not with guilt but with shock. And beside her, on either side, were Ethan and Eli, his 5-year-old twin sons, curled close to her, finally asleep. Their small chests rose and fell with a rhythm Edward had not seen in months. For once, they weren't tossing and turning, drenched in sweat, screaming in nightmares, or clawing at each other's hands in terror. She raised her palms slowly. "I can explain," she whispered, her voice calm, measured, careful not to wake the children. But before she could finish, Edward's hand came down hard across her cheek. The sound cracked through the air like glass shattering. Maya staggered, one hand flying to her face. But she did not cry out. She did not yell. She simply met his eyes with a stunned silence that pierced deeper than any argument. And when he growled, "You're fired. Get out of my house," she did not resist. She only bent down, pressed a soft kiss to the foreheads of Ethan and Eli, and walked past him barefoot, her shoes clutched in her hands. She said nothing. But her silence screamed louder than any defense could. Downstairs, Mrs. Keller, the longtime housekeeper, caught sight of the red mark blooming on Maya's cheek. Her lips parted in shock, but Maya didn't explain. She simply walked out into the drizzle, the gate creaking behind her, leaving Edward standing in his mansion, furious, confused, and alone with a silence that didn't feel like victory. Upstairs, Edward's rage cooled into something else. Something worse. Because for the first time in months, the house wasn't filled with his children's screams. Ethan's brow was smooth, no sweat, no whispers. Eli clutched his teddy bear, but his hand rested limp, not clawing in panic. They weren't drugged. They weren't exhausted from crying. They were simply sleeping. And Maya had done what 14 nannies, 3 therapists, and a dozen doctors had failed to do. Edward sank into the edge of the bed, his head in his hands. His palms still stung from the slap. Shame poured through him like ink spreading through water. His eyes fell on the nightstand, where a folded note lay. "If you can't stay for them, at least don't push away the ones who will." The words carved into him. He read them again, and again, each time cutting deeper. The truth was undeniable. He had pushed away the only person who had given his sons peace. And now, she was gone. Edward didn't sleep that night. He sat in his study, staring at the note, staring at the reflection of a man in the glass window, hollow, hardened, and crueler than he wanted to admit. He had built empires from steel and concrete, crushed competitors with precision, but when it came to his sons, he was powerless. Worse, he was failing. The next morning, when he carried a tray of scrambled eggs and toast to his son's room, they both sat upright, their small faces hopeful at first, then falling when they realized Maya wasn't there. "Where's Miss Maya?" Eli asked, his little voice cracking. Edward froze, the tray trembling in his hands. She had to leave, he whispered. Why? Ethan's eyes narrowed, sharp and accusing in a way no 5-year-old's eyes should be. Edward tried to explain, but Ethan cut him off. Did you yell at her? Edward's throat tightened. He forced a nod. Did you hit her? Ethan's voice was barely a whisper. Edward couldn't lie. His lips pressed into a hard line, and he nodded once more. The boys turned their faces away from him. They didn't cry. They didn't scream. They just turned away, which somehow hurt worse than any tantrum. I'll fix it, Edward said softly. I'll bring her back. But deep down, he wasn't sure if she'd ever forgive him. That day, Maya sat at the bus stop with a paper cup of lukewarm coffee, her coat wrapped tight around her shoulders. She hadn't cried when he hit her. She hadn't cried when she walked out through the gates. But here, in the quiet anonymity of the city streets, her eyes finally burned with tears. She wiped them quickly, because she had taught herself long ago never to cry in public. But the ache in her chest was undeniable. She had endured worse, being abandoned by a foster family at 11, losing her own son to illness, being told again and again that she wasn't strong enough. But this was different. Because in that mansion, she had seen 2 boys broken by grief. She had felt their small hands clutch hers in desperation. She had stayed by their side until they slept for the first time in months. And she had walked away because of a man's fury, not because she had failed them. Her heart was still in that house. And she wondered if she'd ever get it back. The drizzle turned into a downpour again by the time Maya's bus rattled away from the station. She sat in silence, staring at the streaked windows, her thoughts spinning in circles she couldn't untangle. Every bump in the road echoed the sound of Edward's palm against her cheek, not because of the pain, but because of the betrayal. She had trusted him just enough to believe she could help his children. And he had struck her for it. Still, the image of Ethan and Eli curled peacefully beside her replayed in her mind like a forbidden dream. They had begged her not to leave. They had clung to her. And for the first time, she had felt needed. Truly needed. But she couldn't go back. Not after what happened. Not when every instinct told her that men like Edward Hawthorne didn't apologize, didn't listen, didn't change. And yet, she couldn't shake the ache that whispered otherwise. Back at the Hawthorne estate, the silence had shifted. It wasn't the suffocating silence of grief anymore, it was a hollow, guilty quiet. Edward stalked through the hallways, each step echoing against polished marble, his mind replaying the moment he had seen Maya in his bed. He told himself he had been justified. A stranger in his room, his sons tucked against her, it had triggered every alarm bell of fear, of control slipping. But now, replaying it, he realized the truth, the boys hadn't looked afraid. They had looked safe. And he had shattered that safety with one reckless act. On the stool outside their room, he found something else, her sketchbook. At first, he thought it was the careless remnants of someone who had fled in a hurry, but when he picked it up, he realized every line was deliberate. Crude, untrained drawings filled the pages. Ethan and Eli beneath an oak tree. A house too big for its people. A woman sitting between the twins, her arms stretched wide, as if shielding them. Beneath the sketch was a scrawled caption. The one who stays. Edward's throat constricted. He set the sketchbook down, then wandered into the boys' room. Ethan stirred but didn't cry. Eli rolled over and sighed in his sleep. For the first time in months, there were no screams at midnight, no broken glass from night terrors, no staff running in panic. Just quiet. But not the right kind of quiet. The kind that reminded him of what he had lost. By morning, Edward had made up his mind. He found Mrs. Keller in the kitchen, folding napkins. "She's gone," he said, the admission grating on his tongue. Mrs. Keller lifted her gaze, sharp and knowing. "I know. I made a mistake, he muttered. You don't say. She was in my bed. She was in your room, Mrs. Keller cut him off firmly. Because the boys begged her to stay. They wouldn't sleep otherwise. And you weren't here. I was. I saw it. I heard them cry for her. Edward's jaw clenched. I thought. That's the problem, sir, Mrs. Keller said, her voice softer now. You thought. But you didn't listen. Edward pressed his lips together, staring at the chair where Maya had sat at lunch just a day before. Her absence stung more than her presence ever had. I need to find her, he said suddenly, the decision snapping inside him like a rope pulled taut. Mrs. Keller nodded. Start with the return address on her application. Georgia. Edward was already reaching for his coat. Meanwhile, Maya had not gone far. Though she'd bought a train ticket to Savannah, she sat on a bench outside the station, staring at it in her hand. Her fingers tightened around the slip of paper until it nearly tore. She should leave. She wanted to leave. But every time she tried to rise, the weight in her chest anchored her to the bench. A woman nearby offered her a tissue when she saw the silent tears threatening at the corners of her eyes. Maya smiled faintly, whispered thanks, and tucked the tissue into her sleeve without using it. Old habits. Survival habits. She whispered to herself, you've survived worse. You can survive this, too. But her heart was still back in that White House in Greenwich, in the laughter she had heard for the first time in years, in the small arms of two boys who had begged her not to leave. She couldn't abandon them. Not truly. And she wasn't sure how long she could resist the pull to return. Edward didn't wait long. By late afternoon, he was driving through the city, his coat still damp from the morning rain. The address from Georgia felt useless, too far, too vague. He wanted to believe he could track her down with his resources, but a hollow truth gnawed at him, money couldn't fix this. Not what he had broken. Still, instinct told him she hadn't gone far. He was right. At the old community center on the far side of town, the sound of teenage laughter spilled through the cracked gymnasium doors. Inside, Maya crouched by a whiteboard, erasing crooked letters from a lesson on writing. Around her, teenage girls laughed and swapped stories, their notebooks scattered like petals across the floor. Edward's polished shoes echoed too loudly on the linoleum. His presence was like a discordant note in the melody of the room. He scanned the crowd until his eyes locked on Maya. She looked up, startled, her posture stiffening instantly. The laughter around her faded into wary silence. Edward cleared his throat. I need to talk to you, he said quietly. One of the girls, barely 16, stepped in front of Maya protectively. Maya placed a calming hand on her shoulder. It's okay, she said gently. Edward's chest tightened at the quiet authority in her voice. The authority he had shattered with a single slap. Maya led him outside to the same bus stop bench where she had sat the night before. The air was cold, the pavement damp, but she didn't flinch. She sat down with her arms folded tight across her chest. I was wrong, Edward began immediately. I judged you. I reacted without listening. And I put my hands on you. That's something I will regret for the rest of my life. Maya's eyes flicked to him briefly, then back to the street. You didn't believe me. Even after your sons trusted me. Her voice wasn't angry, it was tired. I know, Edward said. You don't get to walk back into my life because you finally realized the truth, she said firmly. I'm not here to clear your conscience. I'm not asking you to, Edward said. His voice cracked despite his effort to keep it steady. I'm here because they asked for you. Not a nanny. Not staff. You. Something in her eyes softened, but her body stayed rigid. How are they? She asked finally. Quiet, Edward admitted. Too quiet. Maya nodded. That's not peace. That's a wound closing over without healing. Edward swallowed hard. Come back, he said simply. She didn't answer. Not at first. Instead, she asked, if I say yes, will I still be just staff? Edward hesitated. No, he said finally. You'll be whatever title you want. Advisor. Mentor. Partner. The word lingered heavier than he intended. Maya studied him for a long moment. Then she said, fine. But I have conditions. Anything. First, no cameras in the children's rooms. There aren't. There were, she said sharply. One nanny told me. Edward blinked. He had forgotten. He nodded. They'll be gone. Second, they eat dinner at the table. With you. No phones. No business. He hesitated, but nodded again. Third, we rewrite the house rules together. With them. They're 5, he muttered. They're people, she countered. For the first time in days, his lips curved into the faintest smile. Anything else? Yes, she said, her voice tightening. The next time you raise your hand to someone who doesn't deserve it, anyone, I'm gone. And I won't come back. Edward's chest ached with the weight of her words. He nodded. Understood. She stood. I'll see them in the morning. That night, for the first time in years, Edward set the dinner table himself. He cleared his phone to the study. He rehearsed a bedtime story aloud in his office, the names awkward on his tongue. Upstairs, the boys tossed in their beds restlessly, waiting, hoping. And just before dawn, as birds began to sing outside, Ethan whispered to Eli, she's coming back. How do you know? Eli asked sleepily. Because she said goodbye, Ethan replied, pulling the blanket over his head. Nobody else ever does. Morning light filtered through the tall windows of the Hawthorne estate, soft gold spilling across the marble floors like a hesitant blessing. Maya stood outside the iron gates, her worn canvas bag strapped over her shoulder, her coat pulled tightly against the early chill. She hesitated only for a moment, her breath misting in the air. Everything about the house looked the same, the towering facade, the trimmed hedges, the intimidating silence that had always wrapped the estate like armor. But she knew it wasn't the same. Not anymore. When the gates swung open with a metallic groan, Harold, the butler, blinked in surprise. Then he inclined his head with something close to reverence. Miss Williams, he said warmly, welcome back. Maya managed a polite smile. Thank you, Harold. Her footsteps echoed as she crossed the foyer, but before she could take in the stillness, the thunder of little feet came from upstairs. She's here. Eli's voice carried down the staircase, bright with excitement. He came barreling into view, curls bouncing, arms wide, and launched himself straight into her waiting arms. She laughed softly, burying her face in his hair. Well, hello to you too, she murmured. Behind him, Ethan appeared more cautiously, holding a sketchbook against his chest. His dark eyes flicked from her to his father, who had appeared at the base of the stairs in a gray sweater and jeans, not his usual armor of tailored suits. Slowly, Ethan descended the steps and held out the sketchbook. We made something. Maya opened it carefully. On the first page was a wobbly drawing of a house with a giant heart floating above it. In front of the house stood 3 figures, Ethan, Eli, and Maya. Above them, scrawled in uneven letters, were the words, "You stayed even when you left." Maya's throat tightened. She pulled Ethan into her arms and whispered, "That's beautiful, honey." "Thank you." Edward watched silently, his hands shoved in his pockets, his jaw tight as though keeping too many words trapped inside. He wanted to speak, to thank her, to apologize again, but the words felt too fragile for this moment. Instead, he cleared his throat and said, "Breakfast is ready." Maya set down her bag and straightened her blouse. Her eyes flicked to his. Good. Because we have rules to rewrite. The four of them sat at the long kitchen table, not the formal dining room with its stiff chairs and cold chandeliers, but the warm, sunlit kitchen where a bowl of scrambled eggs and slices of toast sat waiting. For the first time in months, the table wasn't crowded with staff or silenced by absence. Maya pulled out a notebook and looked at the twins. We're going to talk about what it means to live here together. What's fair? What's safe? And what makes this house feel like home? The boys exchanged a glance, then Ethan raised his hand. Can we have music during bath time? Maya smiled. Reasonable. We'll add it. Eli chimed in eagerly. And no broccoli unless it's disguised. Edward coughed a laugh, nearly choking on his orange juice. Disguised? Like in pasta, Eli explained. Edward raised an eyebrow. I may need clarification on that one. Maya grinned. We'll keep a list. But this isn't just about vegetables, it's about boundaries. She glanced at Edward, her gaze sharp. For all of us. He nodded solemnly. Understood. Over the next hour, the twins scribbled down rules with crayons, their list growing messy but sincere. Always knock before entering. No yelling near bedtime. Hugs must be asked for. Pancakes on Sundays. One story each before lights out. Maya added her own rules in neat handwriting. Listen first. Apologize when you're wrong. No cameras. No exceptions. Finally, Edward leaned forward and added a single line, make space for forgiveness, even when it's hard. When they were done, Maya taped the paper to the refrigerator with two magnets shaped like smiling suns. She stood back, arms crossed. There. The new rules of the house. For the first time in months, the kitchen hummed not with tension, but with the warmth of something that felt dangerously close to hope. Later that afternoon, while the twins played outside beneath the oak tree, Edward found Maya in the library, sorting through a stack of children's books. He lingered in the doorway for a long moment before speaking. They've changed since you were gone, he said. Maya glanced up, a faint smile tugging at her lips. Or maybe they were always capable of it, and no one gave them the space. He stepped closer, his hands clasped behind his back. I've changed too. This time, she didn't look away. I believe that. For a moment, silence stretched between them, filled with unsaid words. Edward's voice finally broke it, quiet but raw. What you did, staying, leaving, coming back, that's more than I deserved. Maya set down the book she was holding. Maybe. But it's what they deserved. And I wasn't going to let your mistake be their lesson. Edward flinched at her bluntness but nodded. I want to be better, he said softly. Then start by being present, she replied. Not just when it's easy. He swallowed hard, shame flickering across his face. Do you think they'll ever forgive me? Maya softened. They already have. Kids are better at that than adults. But you'll have to earn it every day. That evening, Edward tucked the twins into bed for the first time since his wife had died. His voice stumbled over the storybook's words, his accents clumsy, his timing off. Ethan giggled, correcting him, while Eli begged for just one more page. From the doorway, Maya watched silently, her arms folded across her chest. For the first time, Edward didn't look like a billionaire or a cold patriarch. He looked like a father fumbling his way through love. When the lights clicked off and the boys' laughter faded into soft breathing, Edward walked into the hallway where Maya waited. He paused, the weight of vulnerability heavy in his eyes. I was thinking, he said slowly, about what you said. About not being staff. About being more. Maya tilted her head, wary. You're not going to offer me a promotion, are you? A faint smile tugged at his lips. No. I was going to offer you a voice. her brow furrowed. A voice? I want you to help me build something, he explained. Not just for Ethan and Eli. For other kids like them. Kids who've lost something. Someone. Kids who need a place where someone stays. Maya's eyes widened. You mean a foundation? Edward nodded. Something real. You guide it. I'll fund it. For a long moment, Maya said nothing. Her chest tightened, her breath caught. Finally, she extended her hand. Then we have a deal, Mr. Hawthorne. He clasped her hand firmly. Call me Edward. Her lips curved, just slightly. All right, Edward. That night, as she stood outside the boys' room, listening to their steady breathing, Maya whispered softly to herself, I did come back. And for the first time in years, she believed it. 3 weeks is not long enough to change a life, but it's long enough to learn a different rhythm. Breakfasts at the Hawthorne estate got louder. Eli discovered that if you hum into a glass of orange juice, it makes a whale sound that drives his brother wild with laughter. Ethan figured out that if he read the cereal box ingredients out loud like a courtroom stenographer, Eli would sit still long enough to finish an entire bowl. The house rules sheet on the refrigerator developed a permanent curl at the corners where small fingers tapped it for emphasis, always knock. No yelling near bedtime. Pancakes on Sundays. Hugs must be asked for. Edward tried to follow the rules with a zeal that made the boys tease him. He stood in the doorway and knocked twice before entering their room, even when they were the ones calling him in. He caught himself more than once starting to bark an instruction, then swallowing it and crouching to their level instead. When he forgot and raised his voice on a harried morning, he apologized before lunch without prompting. The apology was clumsy, but the boys received it like a prize. Bath time had a soundtrack now, Eli's playlist of Approved Chaos, which somehow included Beethoven, a theme from a superhero cartoon, and a marching band recording from a college Edward had never heard of. Maya leaned against the doorframe and let the steam and brass and laughter billow into the hall. She didn't need to be inside the room to know when things were okay. She could hear it in the way their shoulders uncurled. Maya established routines without announcing them, story time on the stairs, 10 quiet breaths before lights out, a check-in question at dinner that everyone had to answer. What did your hands do today that you're proud of, was a favorite. She wrote notes for the staff and erased others. She rearranged the kids' plates so broccoli looked like a forest beside mashed potato mountains and spaghetti nests. She praised effort, named feelings, and let the boys see adults disagree and resolve without slamming doors. And Edward, who had once measured days by meetings and closings, began measuring them by smaller victories. The first time Ethan reached for his hand in a crowded store. The second bedtime in a row with no nightmares. The morning Eli offered half his toast without prompting because sharing is faster. He found he could carry those moments into his office like talismans and, strangely, that they made him sharper in business rather than softer. He started ending meetings on time. He stopped taking calls at the table. Presence isn't a performance, Maya told him one night when he caught himself narrating his own fatherhood like a report. Just be with them. He'd nodded like a student. The boys, for their part, tested the new world to see if it would hold. Ethan hid beneath the table during a thunderstorm. Eli cried silently for a full minute when a puzzle piece went missing. Neither incident turned into a meltdown that shook the house, but both of them checked the adults' faces carefully. Does the ground stay steady when I shake? It did. They shook, and the ground stayed. On a Wednesday afternoon, Maya took them to the park. She sat on the bench with a thermos of tea while they raced to the top of the jungle gym and shouted, "Watch! Watch!" at intervals that made other parents roll their eyes and then smile. A little girl with braids asked if she could play with them. Ethan said yes right away. Eli looked to Maya. She nodded at him. He nodded at the girl, as if they had sealed something official. When they came home, Edward brought a plate of apple slices to the kitchen island and listened while the twins described the physics of slides. Maya cut the apples into thinner crescents and pretended not to hear when Eli whispered, "He's getting better," as if Edward were a puppy learning tricks. Edward pretended not to hear too, but his eyes shone. That night, sleep came quickly for everyone except Maya. She walked the hallways after the house quieted, as she did on nights when memories pressed too close. She paused outside the twins' room and listened to the small sounds of sleep, then drifted past the library. A line of light cut across the carpet under the door. Edward sat at the desk with his shoulders hunched, a glass of scotch at his elbow, his phone in his hand. The room smelled like paper and citrus and a cologne he rarely wore anymore. Maya tapped once on the doorframe. He started, then looked up, face pinched. "Bad day?" she asked. "Bad email," he said. She stepped in and waited. He turned the screen so she could see. Notice of motion, temporary guardianship hearing glared at them in gray blocks, the words stacked like bricks. The petitioners, James and Eleanor Hollingsworth. Grounds alleged: neglect, emotional instability, inappropriate household staffing, domestic incident. The words domestic incident seemed to throb. Maya didn't sit right away. She traced the outline of a book's spine with her finger, anchored her breath, and then lowered herself into the chair across from him. "They know about me," she said, evenly. "They know about everything," he said, and the shame in his voice was not the shame of being exposed but the shame of having something to expose. She kept her hands in her lap so he wouldn't see them tremble. "When is it?" 2 weeks. He looked like a man who could fight a hostile takeover blindfolded but didn't know how to ask for a glass of water. She stood, crossed to the bar cart, and brought him one. He took it as if she had handed him a rope. "They'll say I can't parent alone," he said. "They'll say I've outsourced my son's hearts to you." "Then we don't go alone," she said. He searched her face. "You'd stand up there after what I did to you?" "I'd stand up there for them," she said. "Not for you. For the boys." He swallowed. "I deserve whatever they throw at me." "They're not throwing it at you," she said, softer now. "They're throwing it at your sons." He closed his eyes. "The Hollingsworths haven't seen the boys since the funeral," he said. "They blamed me for Rebecca's depression. They said I buried her too quickly. They said," he stopped. "They'll make me relive that in court. They'll make all of us relive things," she said. "So we choose what to bring with us. We bring the truth." He looked down at his hands. "What truth?" "That they're healing," she said. "That connection beats control. That you're learning how to show up." Silence stretched and then held. "What does fighting back look like?" he asked, voice steadier. "We document," she said instantly, the plan assembling itself like tiles snapping into place. "The routines. The progress. The rules. We get letters from their pediatrician, from their teacher, from the therapist who sees them at school. We show pictures of the refrigerator rules, the art projects, the breakfast table." "And you?" he asked. "What do you tell them?" "That I'm not a ghost in their house," she said. "That I'm a person who stayed." He put his face in his hands, then scrubbed them down his cheeks and said, "Okay." The next morning, the house ran on adrenaline translated into order. Edward called Mr. Fields, the family attorney who had seen Hawthorne through acquisitions and crises but had never handled anything so domestically intimate. Fields's voice-over speaker was clipped at first, then thawed as Maya asked questions that made him pause. He asked for documentation, for dates, for patterns. He wanted to know the worst version of events and the best. "The worst is obvious," Edward said. "I hit her." "I'll own it," Maya said before the lawyer could speak. "And I'll own what came after." Fields cleared his throat. "Miss Williams, you're not on trial." She and I both are, Edward said quietly. In the kitchen, Mrs. Keller compiled records the house had never thought it would need: therapy appointment confirmations, progress notes from the school counselor, an email from the boys' kindergarten teacher about increased participation. Harold unearthed a receipt folder with a meticulousness that would have impressed an auditor. He looked like he wanted to punch someone and could only punch air. Ethan and Eli sensed the shift the way kids do, collecting scraps of adult sentences and stitching them into a fear. At lunch beneath the oak tree, with grilled cheese cut into triangles and apple slices fanned like scales, Eli asked, "Do we have to live with Grandma Hollingsworth?" Maya's fork paused midair. She set it down with care. "Why would you ask that?" Ethan stared at the grass. "I heard Daddy on the phone. He sounded like he swallowed chalk." Maya folded her napkin into a triangle to match the sandwiches. "Your grandparents asked a court to decide where you live," she said, plain but gentle. "Courts help when grown-ups can't agree. Your dad and I will be there. We'll tell the truth." Eli's eyes filled fast and bright. "They don't like Daddy," he whispered. "They don't like you." Maya scooted closer on the blanket and cupped his chin. "Families aren't built from who likes who on a given day," she said. "They're built from who stays. I'm staying. Your dad is staying. And you are not going anywhere without a fight." Ethan looked up, sharp again. "But they're rich," he said, as if that were an incantation. "So are you," she said, surprising herself. "Rich in people. Rich in rules that keep you safe. Rich in love you are learning to trust." She touched the curled corner of the laminated house rules she had tucked into her bag. "We'll bring this with us," she said. "Let them see what home looks like." That afternoon, Maya turned the guest room desk into a command center. She wrote a statement, not a manifesto, not a speech, just the day-to-day account of what the boys were like when she arrived and what they were like now. She described the night terrors, the silence, the way they spoke only to each other at first, and then the first time Ethan said, "Good night," to Harold without prompting. She described the time Eli brought his stuffed bear to the table, set it in a spare chair, and announced, "He's practicing being brave." At the bottom she wrote, "Healing doesn't happen in clean lines. It's messy. But messiness is not failure, it's evidence that life is being lived." She printed photos, the boys painting a crooked "You stayed" sign, the refrigerator with rules taped on in crayon, pancakes with faces that looked like lopsided moons. She printed a copy of the apology Edward had written to her, not to submit unless asked, but to carry. It mattered that it existed, even if a judge never saw it. Toward evening, she crossed the hall and set the folder on Edward's desk. He was standing by the window with his tie loosened, looking out at the garden. He turned when she entered, and the look on his face, something between gratitude and fear, made her want to wrap him in a blanket and also shake him. She did neither. She said, "It's all here." He picked up the folder, thumbed the edge, then paused when his eye caught on a small piece of paper taped crookedly to a framed photo. "If you can't stay for them, at least don't push away the ones who will." He had kept her note where his eye would find it every day. "I won't push," he said, as if reciting a vow. "Then let's go tell a judge what staying looks like," she said. The boys kept asking for specifics. Would there be a gavel? Would the judge be a man or a woman? Would Grandma Eleanor wear pearls like she did at the funeral? Would anyone make them talk? Maya answered what she could, never promising comfort she hadn't earned. "Will you be with us?" Eli asked the night before the hearing. "In the room," she said. "Not on the same bench, but in the same room." "And if they say we have to go?" Ethan asked. "We appeal," she said. "Grown-ups have to follow rules too." Ethan nodded gravely, as if he had added a rule to the set. They practiced breathing. 10 in, hold for 2, 10 out. They practiced a script for fear, "I am safe right now. There are people here who love me. I can tell the truth without shouting. They didn't rehearse answers to imaginary questions. They rehearsed how to stay in their bodies. On the morning of the hearing, the house smelled like coffee and lemon oil. Harold brought the car around. Mrs. Keller tucked a paper bag with snacks into Maya's tote without comment. Edward wore a charcoal suit that used to broadcast invulnerability and now simply fit a man who had slept only 4 hours but was standing anyway. Maya wore a navy dress with sleeves that covered the faint scar on her wrist where a small fingernail had caught her during a night terror weeks ago. She didn't want questions about what didn't need explaining. The courthouse was colder than it had any right to be and proudly indifferent to personal stories. Marble swallowed footsteps and returned them in echoes that made everyone seem like an intruder. No one was special here. Which was good. Which was terrifying. They sat in the waiting area on a wooden bench polished by decades of nervous families. Across from them, James and Eleanor Hollingsworth looked like money cashed into manners. Eleanor's pearls were indeed perfect. Her mouth was set in an expression that suggested she had bought this particular building with a scowl and was now disappointed by the return. James watched the floor with the air of a man who has lost too many arguments to the person beside him to care about winning this one on his own. They did not look at Maya. They looked past her, as if she were a breeze. Maya had spent a lifetime being looked through. Today she chose to be a wall. Edward's attorney arrived, squeezed his shoulder, nodded to Maya like a colleague. Judge Templeton, he said under his breath. Smart. Strict. Doesn't like theatrics. He glanced at the twins, who were tracing the grain of the bench with their fingers. Good kids. They're scared, Edward said. Good kid fear, Mr. Fields said. Not the other kind. A bailiff opened the courtroom door and called the case. Everyone stood. Ethan's hand shot out for Maya's before he caught himself. He curled it around his own thigh like he had meant to do that all along. Eli looked up at her, and she lowered her head just enough that he could see her mouth form the words without sound, I'm here. They filed in, Edward and Mr. Fields to one table, the Hollingsworths and their lawyer to the other. Maya sat down in the first row of the gallery, hands folded over the tote that held the photographs and the rules and the statement she had written and rewritten until it felt like bone. The twins were ushered to a small bench with a court-appointed child advocate who introduced herself in a whisper and gave them each a pencil eraser shaped like a fox. They clutched them like relics. The judge entered. Silver hair swept into a severe bun. Glasses on a chain. Eyes like X-ray film, clear, unfussy, impossible to charm. Everyone rose, then sat. Paper shuffled. The room cleared its throat. Mr. Fields stood first, his voice measured. He spoke of the twins' mother, of grief and rupture, of a father who had made grave mistakes and then chosen to be taught. He did not gild Edward's violence. He named it, then named the apology and the change. He mentioned Maya once, not as a replacement mother or a savior, but as the adult who stayed when staying was work. The Hollingsworth's lawyer rose and painted a picture of a reckless man buying competence and calling it love. He called Maya uncredentialed and unrelated, and let the words do the work he hoped they would do. He said domestic incident as if he enjoyed the shape of it. The judge listened without moving more than her pen. When she asked if Miss Williams wished to make a statement, the courtroom turned in a small, collective tilt. Maya stood. Her knees did not shake. She walked to the front with the tote still on her arm and placed it at her feet. I don't have a degree in child psychology, she said, and the Hollingsworth lawyer leaned back with an I rest my case smirk that died 2 seconds later. But I know what children look like when they stop believing they're safe. I know how a house sounds when fear is its language. And I know how those sounds change when someone chooses to listen more than they control. She spoke of Ethan, who memorized cereal boxes to calm himself, and of Eli, who gave his toast away when he couldn't give words. She spoke of rules taped to a refrigerator by 4 sets of hands. She did not mention the slap until the judge asked, "Did Mr. Hawthorne strike you?" "Yes," she said. "Once." In fear. He apologized. "It's not nothing. But it's not everything." "And you came back," the judge said, "not a question." "For them," she said. The judge's pen paused. "Thank you, Miss Williams," she said, a dismissal and an acknowledgement. Maya turned to return to her seat. Ethan met her eyes and lifted his fox eraser in a small salute. Eli mouthed, 10 breaths. She took one for him. The judge shuffled papers again, and in the shuffle Maya felt the tremor of a world rearranging itself around a choice one woman in a navy dress had made and kept making. This wasn't the climax. It wasn't the end. It was simply the moment before the drop, the breath at the lip of the roller coaster when you can see the whole track and nothing at all. Having heard preliminary statements, Judge Templeton said, "We'll proceed to testimony." Maya sat. Edward stared straight ahead. The twins ran their thumbs along the ridges of small rubber foxes. Outside, sun slanted across government stone. Inside, a family braced. The bailiff called the first witness. And the truth began its walk. The weight of everything finally came crashing down on me one night as I sat alone in my small apartment. The silence was deafening, pressing against my chest, making it hard to breathe. For weeks, I had been operating on autopilot, surviving, not living. But now, the anger that had burned so hot had cooled into something sharper. Something more dangerous. I wasn't going to beg for their love anymore. I wasn't going to wait for an apology that would never come. I wasn't going to keep crying into my pillow, wondering what I'd done to deserve this. No. They thought they had erased me from their lives. They thought they could humiliate me, strip me of everything, and move on as if I had never existed. But they had underestimated the quiet strength that had been building in me all these years. They had mistaken silence for weakness. That night, as the moonlight slipped through the blinds and painted silver streaks across the floor, I opened my laptop. My fingers hovered over the keyboard for a long moment before they began to type. I wasn't writing an apology letter. I wasn't writing a plea. I was writing a plan. Every slight, every insult, every betrayal, I began cataloging them all. Dates, times, words spoken in venom. I outlined my family's cruelty with surgical precision, like building a case file against criminals. I knew where the skeletons were buried, both figuratively and literally. All the secrets they thought I was too young, too naive, or too forgotten to know, I remembered. And now, I would use them. For hours, I dug through old emails, messages, photos. I pieced together timelines of financial misdeeds, lies whispered at family gatherings, promises broken for greed. My family thought they had painted me as weak, but I had the receipts. And in this world, receipts were power. By dawn, I leaned back in my chair, exhausted but alive in a way I hadn't felt in years. The beginnings of a plan were laid out before me. It wasn't enough to expose them privately. That would only lead to more whispers, more denials. No, this had to be done publicly. On a stage so grand that not even their carefully constructed lies could shield them. I imagined it, the faces of my parents, my siblings, my so-called relatives, when their sins were unveiled in front of everyone who thought they were saints. Their world would collapse in the same way they had once collapsed mine. For the first time since being cast aside, a small, dangerous smile crept across my lips. They had erased me. But I was going to carve my name back into their memory. Not as their victim, but as their reckoning. Weeks passed as I quietly built my arsenal. I didn't move hastily, I moved with the patience of someone who had learned the hard way that timing was everything. Every day after work, I returned to my apartment and added another piece to the puzzle. The more I dug, the clearer it became, my family wasn't just cruel, they were rotten beneath their polished facades. My father, the man everyone in town admired for his discipline, had been funneling money from our grandmother's trust fund into a hidden account. My sister, the golden child, had forged documents to cover up debts she owed. Even my mother, the woman who claimed everything she did was for family honor, had been covering up secrets that would make the neighbors gasp. But revenge wasn't just about exposure. It was about precision. So, when the invitation to the annual family reunion banquet arrived in my mailbox, I knew fate had handed me the perfect stage. This was no ordinary gathering. It was the event where relatives, friends, and business associates mingled. A celebration of our family's legacy. The very legacy they had tried to erase me from. At first, I stared at the invitation in disbelief. Did they really expect me to show up after casting me out? Or had they simply forgotten I even existed and sent it by mistake? Either way, the irony wasn't lost on me. I turned the card over in my hands, and a thought formed in my mind: this isn't just a reunion. This is the battlefield. In the weeks leading up to the banquet, I sharpened my weapons, not swords or guns, but truth. I had everything saved neatly on a hard drive and backed up in the cloud. Photos, financial records, legal documents, voice recordings I had collected over the years when their cruel words slipped from their mouths. All of it organized, undeniable, irrefutable. On the night of the banquet, I dressed simply but with purpose. A sleek black outfit, professional but commanding, paired with the silver necklace my grandmother had once given me before the rest of the family claimed her inheritance. It wasn't just jewelry, it was a reminder of who I was, and who they had tried to erase. As I approached the grand hall, the air was thick with laughter and music. Relatives in fine clothes clinked glasses, bragged about successes, and smiled the kind of smiles that never reached the eyes. For a brief moment, I paused at the entrance, my chest tightening. They had hurt me so much. They had made me believe I was nothing. But not tonight. I stepped inside. Heads turned. Conversations faltered. For a second, the room froze as they registered my presence: the erased child, the unwanted sibling, the forgotten relative. My mother's glass slipped from her hand and shattered on the marble floor. The silence that followed was the sweetest sound I had ever heard. They thought they had buried me. Tonight, I would rise from the grave they dug, and drag every one of their secrets into the light. The silence after my entrance clung to the air like smoke. My relatives blinked, their expressions flickering between shock, disgust, and, for a few, fear. I could feel their whispers rising like waves, crashing softly against the grand walls of the banquet hall. What is she doing here? Didn't they cut her off? Why would she dare show her face? I didn't flinch. I walked slowly, deliberately, each step echoing against the polished marble floor as if I owned it. And in that moment, I realized, I did. Not the building, not the wealth, but the truth. The truth was mine, and it was worth more than all their fortunes combined. At the far end of the hall, my father sat at the head table, his jaw tight, his eyes narrowed in icy disapproval. Beside him, my mother clutched her pearls, her face pale. My sister whispered furiously into her husband's ear, glancing at me as if I were a ghost come back to haunt her. I reached the center of the room and stopped. My voice rang out, calm but cutting. Don't stop on my account. Please, continue celebrating this legacy. The word dripped with venom, and the room stiffened. My father shot up from his chair, his voice booming across the hall. You don't belong here. Leave. Now. The command was meant to break me, like it had so many times before. But this time, I had come prepared. I reached into my bag and pulled out a small remote. A projector hummed to life on the wall behind me, the massive screen flickering on. Gasps spread through the crowd as images appeared: bank transfers, forged documents, emails. This legacy you celebrate, I said, turning to face them, is built on lies, theft, and betrayal. My sister jumped up, face red. You're making this up. She's lying. This is slander. But then her signature appeared on the screen, attached to a forged document tied to her debts. A collective murmur rippled through the room. Her face drained of color. My mother stumbled to her feet, stammering, "This is outrageous. How dare you?" But then an audio clip played. Her voice, unmistakable, cruel and sharp, "She was always the weak one. Best we cut her off before she drags us down." The crowd erupted in gasps. My mother's trembling hands covered her mouth as though she could shove the words back in. And then, finally, I turned my gaze to my father. The man who had always looked at me as if I were nothing. "Shall we?" I pressed another button. The screen filled with bank records tracing money from my grandmother's trust fund into his hidden account overseas. The proof was undeniable. The applause he had always sought from this community was replaced by an eruption of whispers, condemning, scandalized, horrified. He slammed his fist on the table. "Enough. You think this changes anything?" But I only smiled, a small, dangerous smile that I had been holding in for years. It changes everything. Because now, everyone sees you for what you really are. The room was chaos now, relatives shouting, guests leaving, some pulling out their phones to capture the scandal unraveling in real time. I stood in the center of it all, steady, calm, unbroken. For the first time in my life, they were the ones crumbling, not me. They had erased me. But tonight, I rewrote myself into their history, not as their victim, but as their reckoning. And this was only the beginning. The hall was no longer a place of polished laughter and false pride. It had become a battlefield of exposed lies and shattered masks. I stood steady at the center, watching as years of carefully maintained facades crumbled like paper set aflame. The guests, powerful businessmen, local leaders, extended relatives who thrived on proximity to influence, were no longer clapping for my family's legacy. Instead, they whispered frantically, pointing fingers, shaking heads. Some filmed on their phones, capturing every damning detail as the document scrolled across the screen. My sister's husband tried to stand, his voice sharp, "This is an ambush. These files are fabricated." But his words were drowned by the projector, which displayed his name tied to a list of shell companies laundering money. His knees buckled, and he sat back down, pale and shaking. My sister hissed at him, her mask of superiority slipping into raw panic. "You told me they could never trace it." She stopped when she realized the microphones had picked up her words, amplifying them across the hall. The gasp from the crowd was like a dagger. My mother, always the queen of appearances, tried to regain control. She clutched a wine glass, her voice trembling but loud. "This is nothing but a bitter child's revenge. Don't let her poison this family celebration." But the screen betrayed her too. A video clip played, grainy, but unmistakable. Her voice, cold and precise, negotiating the sale of property that had been under my name before they cut me out. The hall went silent. She dropped the glass, it shattered at her feet. And then, my father. The man who had silenced me with just a look for most of my life. He stepped forward, towering, his voice a low growl. "You think you've won something here? You're just a pathetic girl with stolen files. I built this family's empire. Do you think anyone cares about your little presentation?" I tilted my head, the faintest smile curling at my lips. "Do you really think the IRS won't care? Or the board members who already suspected? Or the investors sitting right here, realizing they've been funding fraud?" At that moment, several men in suits near the back exchanged uneasy glances. One of them, a sharp-faced man I recognized as a longtime partner of my father's, pulled out his phone and walked out without another word. A domino had tipped. My father's roar filled the hall. "You ungrateful wretch! You are nothing without us." For a split second, the old pain flickered inside me, the pain of years of being dismissed, belittled, erased. But then it burned away, replaced by steel. No, I said softly, the microphone catching every syllable. I am everything in spite of you. The applause that followed wasn't for my family. It wasn't even for me. It was the kind of applause that comes when truth finally cuts through decades of lies. Guests clapped, not out of joy, but out of release, the collective acknowledgement that justice had walked into that room. My father's face twisted, but for once, he had no words. My mother slumped into her chair, hollow. My sister cried into her hands, mascara streaking like black rivers. Their empire wasn't gone yet, but it was trembling, about to collapse. I picked up the remote and shut off the projector. The silence was deafening. Then I spoke one last time, calm and final. This is the beginning. You erased me. Tonight, I erased the mask you hid behind. The rest? That's already in motion. And I walked out, leaving them choking on the ruins of their perfect night. The banquet became the last night my family stood untouchable. By the next morning, the cracks I had revealed widened into canyons. I woke not to silence, but to the buzz of headlines and phone calls. News outlets had already picked up clips from the banquet, the video of my mother's property deal, my sister's whispered panic, my father's furious outburst. Words like fraud, embezzlement, and corruption danced across morning broadcasts. But the real blow wasn't the public shame. It was the quiet, merciless knock of consequences. By noon, investigators were on their doorstep. Men in black suits walked into the mansion, armed with warrants. Laptops, hard drives, folders, all seized. Their security guards stood helpless as the empire they protected was stripped apart piece by piece. I watched from my own apartment downtown, the news feed streaming live footage of the once mighty estate. My father stood at the gates, shouting at cameras, his tie loose, his hair unkempt, a man clinging to power that had already slipped away. My mother stayed inside, curtains drawn. My sister's husband was nowhere to be seen. It didn't stop there. Bank accounts were frozen. Properties they bragged about at every holiday were flagged for investigation. Business partners, smelling rot in the water, severed ties overnight. Within days, contracts collapsed. Their phones, once ringing with requests and invitations, went eerily silent. And then came the lawsuits. Investors who had been deceived filed claims, some in the millions. Employees, emboldened by the scandal, came forward with testimonies of intimidation and cover-ups. One by one, the walls caved in. For me, it was a strange kind of justice to witness. Not fiery, not cinematic, but slow, grinding, relentless. The law didn't shout, it suffocated. Yet what shook me most wasn't the collapse of their wealth, but the collapse of their unity. From what I heard, whispers through lawyers, leaked phone recordings, the family turned on itself. My sister screamed at her husband, accusing him of ruining everything. My mother blamed my father for dragging her into his dirty deals. And my father, once the iron hand, was reduced to pointing his finger at anyone who would listen, desperate to shift the blame. It was chaos, chaos I had once thought impossible in that pristine household of power and control. But through it all, I felt something unexpected. Not triumph. Not joy. But, release. For the first time, the weight was no longer mine to carry. I didn't have to fight for them to see me, to hear me, to acknowledge me. The world saw them now, not as the perfect family, but as frauds. And me? I was free. At least, that's what I thought. Until the phone rang that night. A private number. I almost didn't answer. But something in me knew. When I picked up, the voice on the other end froze me. Enjoying the show? It was my father. His tone wasn't broken, it was cold, measured, dangerous. You think this is over? He continued. You've made enemies you can't even see yet. You tore this family apart. And I swear to you, you'll regret it. He hung up. The line went dead. And I realized, the war wasn't finished. It had just changed battlegrounds. I should have expected the call. My father was never the type to crumble quietly. If the law was coming for him, then he would strike where he still could, at me. The first sign came 2 days later. I arrived at my office to find the door pried open, papers scattered, my desk drawers rifled through. Nothing was stolen, at least nothing obvious, but the message was clear: I can still reach you. I didn't bother calling the police. I knew how this worked. My father had friends in places I couldn't even imagine. Reporting it would mean paperwork, delays, maybe even a warning that somehow ended up back in his hands. Then came the surveillance. I started noticing the same black car parked near my apartment, the same man with a newspaper on the bench across from my gym. Sometimes I'd hear the faint click of a camera shutter when I walked down the street. He wasn't just trying to scare me. He was gathering ammunition. And soon, he used it. An email leaked to one of the tabloids, photos of me leaving a bar late at night, a slanted story about the disgraced daughter living off her family's downfall. They painted me as a traitor, a parasite, someone who had orchestrated the collapse for money. For a moment, it worked. People whispered. Colleagues gave me long looks. Old friends texted hesitantly, asking if the rumors were true. But I refused to crumble. Instead, I did something my father never expected. I went public. I sat down with a journalist, one he couldn't buy, one who had been chasing his corruption for years. For hours, I told everything: the intimidation, the fraud, the way they erased me, the threats. I handed over documents I had kept hidden, recordings I had made long before the banquet, even financial trails I discovered when digging for my own survival. The article dropped like a bomb. Suddenly, the story wasn't "estranged daughter destroys family." It was "daughter exposes decades of fraud and abuse inside powerful dynasty." And this time, the evidence was undeniable. My father's retaliation only made him look guiltier. His threats, his smear campaigns, his shadow games, they weren't signs of strength, but desperation. Still, it didn't stop him. One night, as I left a cafe, a man brushed past me, slipping something into my coat pocket. I didn't notice until I got home and felt the weight: a small envelope. Inside was a single photograph. It was me, standing outside my building. Taken that morning. On the back, scrawled in sharp, deliberate handwriting, were 3 words. "You're not safe." My hands shook as I dropped it. My father was finished in the public eye, but behind closed doors, he was still dangerous. And I knew then, if I wanted this war to end, truly end, would have to end it on my terms. The warning should have frozen me. Should have sent me packing, running for some safe corner of the world where his reach couldn't follow. But instead, it lit a fire under my skin. Fear turned into something sharper, something alive. Because if he was threatening me directly, it meant he was losing control. Still, I wasn't naive. I changed my locks, installed cameras, carried a small can of pepper spray wherever I went. But it wasn't enough. Deep down, I knew it wasn't going to stop him. My father wasn't the kind of man who played at intimidation for long. He escalated. Always. And he did. It happened on a rainy Thursday evening. I had stayed late at the office, combing through yet another stack of files the journalist requested. When I finally stepped outside, the streets were slick with water, the lamplight stretching across puddles. I walked toward my car, keys tight in my grip. That's when I heard footsteps. Too deliberate. Too close. I turned, and 2 men in dark coats emerged from the shadows. No words, no hesitation. They came straight for me. My heart slammed against my ribs as adrenaline roared through me. I bolted, my shoes splashing through puddles, my breath ragged in the damp night air. One of them shouted, the other lunged, his hand brushing the back of my jacket. I twisted, swinging the pepper spray hard into his face. He screamed, clutching his eyes. The other man cursed and reached into his coat pocket, and that's when headlights exploded across the alley. A car screeched to a halt. Doors burst open. Two strangers, no, not strangers. The journalist and her cameraman. They had been waiting for me, following me to make sure I was safe. The second man froze, realizing he was now caught on camera. He spat on the ground and fled into the night, leaving his partner writhing in pain. The cameraman rushed to me, his voice shaking, "We got it. We got the whole thing." And they did. The footage went online within hours. Two hired men, cornering me in an alley, caught in perfect clarity. It didn't take long for people to connect the dots. Who else had motive? Who else had the power and desperation to order something like that? The public turned. Hard. What little sympathy my father had clung to evaporated overnight. His name wasn't spoken with respect anymore, only with disgust, with fear, with condemnation. But for me, the message was clear. This wasn't over. The photograph, the smear campaigns, the attack, they were all leading to one thing. My father wasn't just trying to silence me. He was trying to erase me completely, just as he had done years ago. But I had survived him once. And now I was stronger. I looked into the camera the journalist held, my face pale but my eyes steady. "Tell him," I whispered, "I'm not afraid." The world would hear it. He would hear it. And when the final act came, it wouldn't be me lying broken. It would be him. The night of the attack replayed in my mind for days. The hiss of footsteps, the desperate burn of my lungs, the wild gleam of headlights. I could still hear the man's scream as the pepper spray scorched his eyes. But more than anything, I could hear my father's voice, echoing from years ago, "You'll never win against me." Maybe that had been true once. Not anymore. The footage went viral. For the first time, the public wasn't looking at me with suspicion. They were looking at him. Politicians who once shook his hand began to distance themselves. Investors pulled out. Clients severed ties. And through it all, my father stayed silent. No interviews. No statements. That silence was worse than any threat. It meant he was calculating. And then, one evening, I got the invitation. A plain white envelope slipped under my apartment door. No return address. Inside was a single note, written in his neat, rigid script. "One last meeting. Tomorrow. Midnight. Our house. Come alone." For a long time, I just stared at the page, my hands trembling. Every instinct told me it was a trap. But my heart told me it was the end. One way or another. So I went. The house looked the same as it always had, sprawling, cold, lit like a monument. As I walked through the gates, memories stabbed at me. The sound of his voice booming down the halls. The way I'd hide in my room, waiting for it to pass. Now, those halls were quiet. I found him in the study, sitting behind his massive mahogany desk. He looked smaller somehow. Not weak, but weathered. His hair grayer than I remembered, his posture less certain. But his eyes, sharp, hard, hadn't changed. "You've caused me a great deal of trouble," he said, his voice even. "You've caused me a lifetime of it," I shot back. He smiled faintly, like my anger amused him. "And yet, here you are. Still craving my approval. Still wanting to prove me wrong." "That's where you're mistaken," I whispered. "I'm not here for you. I'm here to finish this." He leaned forward, his hands folding. "Do you think you've won? Do you think exposing a few papers, a few recordings, will bring me down? Men like me don't fall, child. We adapt. We survive." I met his gaze, steady, unblinking. Not this time. Because I wasn't alone. Hidden microphones lined my jacket. Cameras outside caught every word spilling from his lips. The journalist was already broadcasting. The world was watching him as he admitted, without realizing, that he was untouchable, that he had orchestrated, manipulated, silenced anyone who dared to cross him. His arrogance had always been his greatest weakness. And tonight, it was his noose. For the first time in my life, I saw fear flicker in his eyes. Just a crack. Barely visible. But it was there. And in that crack, I found my freedom. The silence between us didn't last. A faint buzz came from my pocket, the signal from the journalist. The live stream was on. Thousands, maybe millions, were already watching. His words were no longer confined to the cold walls of his study. They were out there, seeping into living rooms, offices, and news stations across the country. My father leaned back, his eyes narrowing. He wasn't a fool. He knew. You think the world cares? His voice was calm, but his hands were clenching the armrests of his chair. People forget. They move on. Tomorrow they'll be watching a scandal about some movie star, and I'll still be here. But even as he spoke, the vibration in my pocket grew stronger, message after message pouring in. The journalist had added a live comment feed. And the comments, they weren't moving on. They were furious. Words like monster, criminal, predator flashed across the screen. Former employees were already chiming in with their own stories. Names I recognized, faces I remembered, people I'd seen destroyed by him, were finally finding the courage to speak. And then, the front gates opened. Headlights cut through the windows. Not one car. Dozens. News vans, police cruisers, black SUVs. Sirens blared in the distance, growing closer. My father stood. For the first time, his mask cracked. His face twisted with rage as he slammed a fist against the desk. You ungrateful wretch. I built this empire. I gave you my name, my blood, my legacy. I rose too, my heart hammering. And you used it to destroy everyone around you. Including me. He came around the desk, fast for his age, his hand shooting out to grab my arm. But I didn't flinch. Not this time. Behind us, the heavy knock of fists rattled the front door. A booming voice followed. Open up. Police. His grip loosened. For the first time in my life, he looked small to me. Not the towering figure who ruled my childhood with fear. Just a man who had finally run out of shadows to hide in. The door burst open. Officers swarmed in, their flashlights slicing through the dark. Cameras followed, recording every second. My father straightened his suit, trying to summon his old arrogance, but it was too late. The moment the cuffs clicked shut, the spell broke. He wasn't untouchable anymore. As they dragged him past me, he hissed under his breath, low enough that only I could hear. This isn't over. But it was. Because outside, the crowd was already chanting my name. For the first time, I wasn't his shadow. I was the light that exposed him. The sound outside was deafening. Chants, camera shutters, news anchors shouting into microphones, the chaos spilled across the front lawn like wildfire. I stepped out of the mansion just as they pushed my father into the back of a police car. The blinding flash of cameras caught every angle of his face, the scowl, the sneer, the last scraps of his pride crumbling for the world to see. Mr. Bennett. Is it true you orchestrated fraud across multiple companies? Do you deny the accusations of embezzlement? What about the testimony from your own employees? He didn't answer. He couldn't. His jaw was locked so tight, I thought his teeth might shatter. The crowd parted as they escorted him away. For a split second, our eyes met through the glass of the cruiser's window. That same look, a mixture of rage and disbelief, burned into me. But now, it didn't pierce me the way it once had. Now, it fueled me. The journalists swarmed me next. Microphones thrust toward my face, the red recording lights blinking like eyes. Are you his son? Did you know about the corruption? What made you come forward now? I didn't say much. Just enough. He took everything from me. And from others. Tonight, I took it back. It was short, sharp, and it spread like gasoline on fire. Within minutes, it was clipped, shared, broadcasted across every channel and social feed. Inside the house, officers and agents tore through the study, dragging out box after box of files, hard drives, hidden safes pried open. Years of secrets spilled into the open. Evidence. Proof. Every weapon he had wielded in silence was now ammunition against him. And the empire? It collapsed faster than I could have imagined. By morning, his company's stocks were in freefall. Board members scrambled, their statements filled with hollow denials. Longtime allies went silent, their loyalty evaporating with his power. Former partners turned on him, suddenly shocked by the revelations they'd chosen to ignore for years. It was poetic, watching it all unravel. The mighty pillars he had built, crumbling under the weight of truth. Yet beneath the roar of chaos, I felt something quieter, something I hadn't felt in years. Relief. Like I could finally breathe without the crushing weight of his shadow on my chest. But freedom was complicated. Because with the relief came another truth, one I wasn't sure I was ready to face. The world didn't just see him anymore. They saw me. And they wanted to know everything. In the weeks that followed, the storm didn't die down, it grew. Every channel carried his downfall like it was the headline of the decade. Prominent businessmen arrested on fraud charges, family empire exposed by forgotten son. My name was whispered in interviews, printed in papers, trending online. For so long I had been invisible, a shadow cast out of the family picture. Now the world wanted to know me. But fame wasn't what I sought. My revenge had never been about that. It was about reclaiming what they took, my dignity, my worth, my place in a world that had tried to erase me. And I had it now. I could breathe without shame. I could walk without lowering my head. When people spoke my name, it wasn't with pity, it was with respect. Still, there was one thing left undone. I went to see him. The prison visiting room was gray, suffocating, buzzing with the low hum of fluorescent lights. When they brought him in, shackled and thinner than I'd ever seen him, he looked smaller somehow. Not in size, but in spirit. Like the weight of his sins had finally settled onto his shoulders. He sat across from me, his eyes burning with that same mix of anger and disbelief he wore the night of his arrest. For a long while, we just stared at each other. "You think you won," he finally muttered, his voice cracked and bitter. "But this isn't over. You hear me? I built everything. You're nothing without me." I leaned forward, calm, steady. "No. I'm nothing because of you. But I'm everything in spite of you." For the first time, he faltered. His lips trembled, his gaze broke. He had no empire to shield him now. No sycophants, no wealth, no family to pretend. Just a man in a cage, stripped bare. And me, the son he had cast out, standing taller than he ever imagined I could. I rose from my chair, the sound of my footsteps echoing in that hollow room. At the door, I turned one last time. "You erased me once. But the world will remember me long after they forget you." I didn't wait for his reply. I didn't need to. Outside, the air felt lighter. The sun broke through the clouds, warm against my skin. For the first time in years, I felt free, not because he was behind bars, but because I was no longer chained to the past. My revenge was complete. But more importantly, my life was finally my own. In the end, this story reminds us that silence is never weakness, and justice always finds its way to the surface. As one great saying goes, the truth may be buried, but it cannot be destroyed. If this story resonated with you, make sure to subscribe to True Echo for more powerful stories that inspire and challenge. Leave a comment below to share your thoughts, and don't forget to share this video so others can hear the truth that echoes.